Chapter 1. The Broken Fan Ribs, the small fan-making workshop, tucked away in a remote corner of London's East End, was ever filled with the warm, sweet fragrance of red sandalwood and the clean, raw aroma of fresh lacquer. Aurelia Danby sat by her worn oak table, her hazel eyes intently focused on the delicate ivory fanguard rib secured upon a mounting stand. Her right hand held a microscopic steel chisel, each incision executed with utmost precision and steadiness, carving soft, undulating wave patterns onto the ivory surface that was barely 2 millimeters thick. Behind her, Oliver, her 11-year-old brother, carefully used a soft squirrel hairbrush to mix watercolors upon a white porcelain plate, preparing for Aurelia to paint the coastal scenery of Thornwood Harbor onto the thin silk leaf of the fan. She could feel her brother's steady breathing beside her, and the soft, rhythmic scraping of her tools, creating a rare sanctuary of peace in the midst of the noisy metropolis. "Sister Aurelia, I have mixed this cobalt blue with a few drops of turpentine, just as Father taught us. Would you please check if the transparency of the pigment is to your liking?" Oliver asked softly, offering the small porcelain color plate to his sister. The boy's face was still smudged with a few black paint streaks on his cheek, but his eyes shone bright with diligent focus. Aurelia set her chisel down, raised her eyes to inspect the plate, and offered a gentle, warm smile. "The color is excellent, Oliver. You have truly mastered the ratio of turpentine. Now, please help me stretch the cream-colored silk onto the bamboo frame. This fan is our most important commission this week, to secure the rent money." Their father, Arthur Danby, had once been the most celebrated fan painter in all of Mayfair, a master craftsman who specialized in creating exquisite fans as gifts for noble ladies during the grand ballrooms of the London season. However, his stellar reputation and extraordinary talent had aroused the greed of a formidable rival. Lord Osmond Hawkstone, the cousin of the late Duke of Thornwood, had conspired with a fraudulent art dealer to falsely accuse Arthur Danby of stealing the military architectural designs of Thornwood Harbor, claiming they were hidden within the ivory ribs of a fan presented to the king. The unjust sentence quickly stripped them of everything. Arthur was deprived of his artisan license, his property was sealed, and he ultimately perished from exhaustion in a cold, dark prison cell. Aurelia and Oliver were cast out onto the damp streets of the East End, with nothing but their bare hands and the tarnished reputation of being a traitor's offspring. Determined to restore her family's honor and raise her brother, Aurelia had opened this anonymous, humble fan workshop. Her hands, though small, bore light calluses from holding wood chisels and faint stains of botanical pigments, yet they retained the absolute precision that her father had proudly passed down to her. She constantly reminded herself that every stroke, every fan rib she crafted was not merely a means of survival, but a vessel to uncover the truth and reclaim justice for her late father. "Purchase exquisite hand-painted fans, ladies, noble duchesses. Sweet red sandalwood fans for your elegant tea parties." Oliver stood before the small stall front, calling out gently, holding a silk fan painted with miniature roses to welcome potential customers. The artisanal market along the Mayfair roadside was bustling with activity at this hour of the afternoon. A few noble ladies paused, drawn by the refined scent of sandalwood wafting from Aurelia's display table. They picked up the intricately carved ivory fans to inspect them, praising the microscopic coastal landscape paintings that looked so vivid. However, just as Aurelia was preparing to wrap the very first fan she had sold that day, a harsh, violent disturbance erupted from the edge of the crowd. Lord Osmond Hawkstone marched forward, draped in a luxurious velvet cloak trimmed with silver fox fur, his hand gripping an ebony cane tipped with silver that clicked sharply against the snow-covered cobblestones. Behind him followed 3 burly attendants, looking ready to stir up trouble at his command. "Honorable ladies, I advise you to exercise extreme caution with these decorative trinkets," Osmond spoke in a voice dripping with malicious irony, "lest you find yourselves holding stolen royal military documents, crafted by the daughter of the traitor Arthur Danby." The crowd murmured in shock upon hearing the name Danby. The ladies hastily set the fans back down on the table, as though they were poison, drawing back with gazes full of suspicion and disgust. Lord Osmond, Aurelia stood tall behind her display table, her hands gripping the wooden edge to maintain her composure. She looked straight into the cunning face of Osmond, her hazel eyes showing no trace of fear. "These are hand-painted fans crafted entirely by my own hands from clean materials purchased in Surrey. They are fully lawful works of art designed for the nobility." "Lawful art?" Osmond laughed loudly, the sound harsh and grating. Your father said the exact same sword, sir. He concealed the secret designs of Thornwood Harbor within the ribs of the fan he presented to the king. The blood of you Danbys is nothing but theft and treason. Do you truly believe the high society of London will buy the rubbish of a stained family? Oliver shrank back in fear behind his sister, his small hands clutching the hem of Aurelia's worn woolen sweater. My father was falsely accused, and he knew exactly who forged the handwriting to frame him. Lord Osmond, Aurelia spoke aloud, her chest rising and falling with anger. Osmond's face darkened with rage. He stepped forward, using his cane to violently sweep the pile of silk fans off the table and into the mud. The painstakingly painted roses and coastal landscapes floated in the dirty puddles of melted snow. Seize this insolent wench and smash their filthy stall to pieces. Osmond barked to his attendants. Two burly attendants rushed forward, pushing Aurelia violently to the cold, hard ground. The remaining attendant roughly overturned the small wooden table. The exquisitely carved ivory fans, the fruit of a month of sleepless nights for the siblings, fell onto the stone street, crushed to splinters under heavy leather boots, leaving sharp fragments of ivory buried in the mud. Stop it, do not break my sister's fans. Oliver cried out, rushing forward to stop them, but he was pushed aside by one of the attendants, falling hard into the pile of broken ribs, his small hand cut and bleeding from the sharp ivory splinters. Aurelia struggled to stand up in pain, gathering the weeping Oliver into her arms. She looked at the shattered ivory fan ribs at her feet, a deep hatred burning in her heart. Osmond looked at the ruins, a triumphant sneer on his lips. This is the price for daring to show your face in Mayfair, Miss Danby. I shall ensure you and your brother live like rats in the dark sewers of London, Osmond whispered threateningly before turning and walking away with his men. Aurelia knelt on the cold snow, her scraped hands holding Oliver tight against her chest, her gray eyes staring coldly at the retreating figure of the villain, silently vowing to reclaim justice for her late father. Chapter 2: The Night's Anchor. The late afternoon rain poured down upon Mayfair, washing away the remnants of the market but doing nothing to alleviate the bone-chilling cold that penetrated Aurelia's body. She huddled beneath the stone archway of an old bookstore, using a worn woolen scarf to bandage Oliver's bleeding hand. The boy had fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion, his head resting on his sister's lap. Amidst the mud, Aurelia had only managed to salvage a single ivory fan, which was missing 3 ribs along its edge, a fan depicting the coastal horizon of Thornwood Harbor with perfect, parallel horizontal lines painted in durable watercolor. She looked at the wounds on her brother's hand, her heart wrenching with pity and helplessness. She wondered if there was any escape for the two of them in this cold city. She gently patted Oliver's shoulder, whispering soft words to comfort the boy as he wept against her in the heavy rain. She wished her father were still alive, wished they did not have to endure this humiliating life of flight. Suddenly, the rapid clatter of horse hooves echoed from the far end of the deserted Mayfair street. A luxurious dark carriage, bearing no visible family crest but pulled by 4 powerful black horses, glided through the pouring rain and pulled up right before the bookstore's archway. The carriage windows were tightly covered with thick black velvet curtains, preventing even a single ray of light from entering. This ancient bookstore had once been a place her father, Arthur Danby, frequently visited to search for old German and Italian copperplate engravings. The owner of the shop was a kind, white-haired old man, the only one in the neighborhood who did not chase them away when Osmond's men pursued them. Aurelia looked at the rows of dusty old books, smelling the decaying parchment mixed with the damp mold of the cold rain, feeling an infinite sorrow for the lost glory of her family. The appearance of the Duke's carriage was like a flash of lightning through the dark sky, reigniting the hopes of justice that had seemed to die in the young girl's heart. The carriage door opened, and a quiet butler stepped down holding an umbrella, respectfully receiving a tall man who emerged from the dark interior. He was Lysander Hawkstone, Duke of Thornwood, the famous nobleman known in London high society as the Dizzy Duke. He had returned from Waterloo with legendary military achievements, but carried a severe head injury that resulted in vertigo, a chronic vestibular imbalance. Whenever he faced wide-open spaces or the spiral-patterned floors of grand halls, his brain triggered a spinning sensation, making it impossible for him to walk steadily, without a cane and a stable visual anchor. His cousin Osmond was currently pressure-forcing him to surrender control of Thornwood Harbor by attempting to prove Alistair. Lysander was incompetent due to his unsteady gait. Lysander stepped down from the carriage very slowly, his right hand gripping his gold-tipped ebony cane. As he stepped onto the slippery stone threshold, a sudden wave of dizziness struck him, causing his body to waver slightly as he almost lost his balance. He clenched his jaw, fighting to control his breathing to suppress the spinning sensation rising in his brain. Just then he caught the faint scent of sandalwood and saw a small flame from Aurelia's tinderbox lighting up the corner of the archway. He turned, his sharp hawk-like gray eyes locking onto the girl sitting beneath the stone canopy. Aurelia stood up, opening the broken ivory fan to shield her small fire from the wind. On the silk leaf of the fan, the painting of Thornwood Harbor's coastline, with its perfectly symmetrical, horizontal horizon line, was clearly illuminated by the firelight. Lysander looked at the fan, his eyes immediately locking onto the parallel horizon line, painted with Aurelia's masterly brushstrokes. Miraculously, the illusion of the spinning floor in his head ceased. His brain, by anchoring its visual focus onto the symmetrical horizontal line on the fan, quickly re-established his body's sense of balance. For the first time in months, he could stand tall and steady without relying entirely on his ebony cane. This sudden stability brought him a wonderful sense of relief, the heavy tightness in his chest dissolving as he breathed in the scent of sandalwood from the ivory ribs. "That fan," Lysander spoke in a deep, gravelly voice of authority. "Your Grace, this is a fan depicting the scenery of Thornwood Harbor, crafted by my own hands," Aurelia answered, her voice steady despite her rain-drenched clothes. Lysander stepped closer under the butler's umbrella, looking closely at the refined brushwork and the perfect horizontal horizon on the fan. He recognized it immediately as the exclusive fan painting technique of the Danby family drawings, capable of creating an optical illusion that balanced the viewer's focus, which his late father had once mentioned. "Danby," Lysander murmured, "the daughter of Arthur Danby." "Yes, Your Grace, I am Aurelia Danby, and my father was no traitor," she replied, looking straight into his gray eyes without a trace of fear. Lysander silently studied the small, proud girl before him. He was facing Osmond's plot to pave the grand ballroom floor with concentric, spiral-patterned marble to disable him during the upcoming Royal Winter Solstice Gala. This girl's handheld fan with its stabilizing horizon lines was the only visual anchor that could help him navigate his vertigo before the crowd. He understood that without her, he would completely fail against his greedy uncle's scheme to seize his inheritance. "Bring the siblings into the carriage," Lysander ordered his butler decisively. Aurelia warily shielded Oliver. "Your Grace, we, Miss Danby," Lysander looked at her with a deep, serious gaze. "The enemies of your father wish to drive you to your death in London. And I require your specialized perspective painting skills to stand firm before the estate trustees. I shall patronize your honor and protect your lives. In return, you shall serve as the private restorer for Thornwood Manor and redraw the harbor maps for me. Is this transaction fair enough for you?" Aurelia looked at her brother Oliver, who was shivering from the cold, and then at the Duke's stern but sincere face. She knew this was the only chance for their survival and to restore their family's name. She felt a spark of hope ignite amidst the freezing rain of Mayfair. "I accept, Your Grace," Aurelia answered firmly. She folded the broken fan into her basket and stepped into the Duke's black carriage, embarking on a new path of hope. Chapter 3. The Wind-Swept Manor. The black carriage traveled through the night along the wind-swept coastal paths, finally stopping before the massive iron gates of Thornwood Manor as dawn broke. The ancient estate stood majestically on a cliff overlooking the ocean, surrounded by crashing waves. As Aurelia stepped down, she immediately noticed something unusual. Along all the stone corridors, staircases, and grand rooms of the manor, thick oak handrails were securely mounted to the stone walls. The manor seemed designed to support someone who constantly needed physical anchors to move. "Welcome to Thornwood, Miss Danby," the butler said as he led them through the grand entrance. Inside the manor, the air carried the salty tang of the sea and the quiet dignity of ancient gray stone walls. Aurelia was shown to her workshop on the second floor, a spacious room with a large bay window overlooking Thornwood Harbor. A large wooden desk, high-quality lacquer boxes, various animal hair brushes, and unworked ivory fan ribs had been prepared for her. Oliver let out a happy cry when he saw the warm room with a small bed prepared for him near the fireplace. Aurelia breathed a sigh of relief, arranging her tools. She carefully opened the wooden box containing her father's botanical paint formulas and placed them on the shelves. The stone gardens surrounding Thornwood Manor were filled with brilliant yellow gorse bushes and wild lavender creeping along the cliffs. Aurelia decided she would harvest these local botanicals to craft her own organic dyes for her workshop. She believed pigments extracted from the Yorkshire wild would offer a more authentic depth and better durability against the corrosive sea wind. Oliver happily ran after his sister, helping her gather dry roots and small shells to grind into pigments, his innocent laughter bringing warmth to the silent castle. The cold Yorkshire wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of sea salt, but the physical labor and the warmth of the sun kept their spirits high as they prepared their materials. Mrs. Gable, the longtime housekeeper of the manor, entered with the usual stern expression of a noble servant, though her eyes softened when she saw Oliver help his sister. "Miss Danby, His Grace has a few strict rules for you, Mrs." Gable said gently. "First, you are only permitted in the workshop and the grand library. Second, you must never enter His Grace's private quarters in the west wing. Third, every fan you produce must feature a perfectly symmetrical horizontal horizon line. His Grace is extremely sensitive to spiral patterns." "I understand the rules, Mrs. Gable," Aurelia curtsied politely. "I shall observe them fully." However, as Aurelia was cleaning the shelves, she noticed Oliver hiding his right hand in his sleeve, whimpering in pain. She went to him, lifting his hand, and gasped in distress. His palm was still bleeding, with sharp fragments of the broken ivory ribs from the clash at Mayfair still embedded under his skin, and the wound had begun to swell and turn red. The freezing cold from the wharf had caused a mild infection. Just as Aurelia was anxiously searching for warm water and herbal oils to dress the wound, the workshop door opened. Lysander entered, his hand guiding him along the oak handrail. Behind him was an elderly physician carrying a silver-trimmed leather medical case. "I saw that your brother was injured at the wharf," Lysander said in a cold tone, though his gray eyes held a quiet concern. "Doctor, Gray shall treat the boy's hand. In Thornwood, no artisan of mine is permitted to work with damaged hands." Aurelia stared at the Duke in surprise. She bowed in deep gratitude as Dr. Gray gently used tweezers to extract the ivory fragments, washed the wound with antiseptic alcohol, and applied a soothing lavender ointment before bandaging it with clean gauze. Throughout the process, Lysander stood silently by the door, his gray eyes observing every movement. Once the physician finished and left, Lysander stepped toward the wooden table, placing a small jar of chamomile ointment, Surrey crafted, on the desk. "Apply this to the boy's hand twice a day. It is the best ointment from the Royal Military Hospital," Lysander said before turning to leave, his tall figure disappearing down the candle-lit corridor. That silent, refined care from the dizzy Duke touched the softest part of Aurelia's heart, easing her fear of the cold, imposing Thornwood Manor. Though the estate was wind-swept and majestic, she could sense a deep loneliness and burden weighing upon the young Duke. He had to hide his vertigo from the enemies who wished to seize his land. She promised herself she would carve the most exquisite fans, not only to fulfill their transaction for survival, but to help Lysander stand firm against the storms of his life. That evening, Aurelia stood by the window looking out at the dark sea, the waves crashing against the cliffs in a deep rhythm. She knew the Duke was fighting a terrible affliction, and this wind-swept manor was his fortress. She returned to bed, holding Oliver close, feeling a sense of peace after the storms of the East End. The sea wind outside occasionally howled against the stone walls, but the fireplace remained warm. She whispered a prayer for her brother's healing and for the work ahead, before falling into a peaceful sleep under her new home. The Grand Library of Thornwood Manor was a true treasure trove of culture, with thousands of leather-bound volumes rising to the ceiling. In the late afternoons, when the sea fog gathered against the glass panes, Aurelia would wander through the rows of mahogany shelves, smelling the old paper and studying the ancient maritime charts. She found the naval journals of the British royal fleets from the previous century, detailing stormy voyages and distant harbors. These records helped her understand the strategic importance of Thornwood Harbor, and inspired the designs for her fans. She felt a connection between her work and the destiny of this wild northern shore. Chapter 4. The anchored horizon 2 weeks passed quickly in the busyness of the Thornwood fan-making workshop. Aurelia spent all her time in the Grand Library, restoring the ancient silk fans of the family and studying the ancient harbor charts. With the masterly painting talent she inherited from her father, she found a way to combine shades of indigo and cobalt blue to create perfect horizontal horizon lines on the fan leaves. When looking at these symmetrical parallel lines, the viewer's brain would automatically adjust its visual focus, immediately terminating the dizzying vertigo sensation. She worked passionately, forgetting the passage of time as every ivory fan rib under her hands seemed to come alive. bringing back the heroic historical stories of the Hawkstone family. Lysander frequently visited her workshop during the night. He never came too close, always standing at a polite and gentlemanly distance of 6 feet, silently observing her small hands as they moved the brush gracefully over the thin silk. The soft scraping of the brush and the gentle scent of sandalwood from the fan ribs created a peaceful atmosphere that quieted the Duke's tense mind. The brief conversations between them in the quiet night helped them understand each other better. Lysander spoke of his difficult days of battle at Waterloo, and the agonizing pain of enduring a severe head injury from shrapnel embedded deep in his skull. Aurelia listened with deep empathy, sharing with him her father's passion for art and her desire to restore the Danby family honor. Lysander stood by the large window, looking out at the ocean, his tall and lonely figure outlined against the night sky. He spoke softly of his childhood memories at this estate, a time before he had experienced the horrors of war. In those days, he could run freely on the rugged cliffs, climbing to the top of the lighthouse to watch merchant ships from afar coming into port. Waterloo had taken from him not only his health, but also his freedom to immerse himself in the wind-swept nature. Whenever he stood before the sea, the vertigo returned, making him feel as though he were falling straight into the deep abyss of the ocean, a terror that choked his chest. One night, as Aurelia was stretching herself on a tall wooden ladder to paint a large harbor scene on a silk curtain decorating the library, she accidentally slipped on a worn wooden step. The silk slipped from her hands, and Aurelia lost her balance, falling freely toward the hard stone floor below. In that moment of peril, Lysander did not care about his vertigo. He rushed forward, throwing away his gold-tipped ebony cane, and caught her slender body in his arms. He held her tight against his chest, absorbing the full force of the fall, as they tumbled together onto the thick woolen carpet. Aurelia stepped closer, gently guiding him on how to train his eyes when no fan was nearby. She told him to hold his index finger straight in front of his face, focusing his entire gaze on the tip of his finger as his single anchor point, and then slowly move his finger horizontally. Lysander patiently followed her instructions, feeling a slow stability spread through his brain. The romantic chemistry between them deepened through these quiet training sessions under the flickering candlelight of the ancient library, where two lonely souls found each other amidst the storms of life. Aurelia panted, her hands clutching Lysander's broad shoulders. The distance between them was now so close that she could feel his racing heartbeat and the masculine scent of cedarwood wafting from his black velvet cloak. Lysander's gray eyes looked straight at her, his deep gaze filled with profound worry. "You are too reckless, Aurelia," Lysander whispered softly, his voice deep and slightly gravelly. "The silk painting can be repainted, but your safety is the most important thing." "Thank you for saving," Aurelia whispered, blushing as she felt the strong warmth of his hands supporting her waist. Lysander slowly let her go, standing up and helping her up, but he did not retreat to the 6-foot distance as he usually did. Standing close to her under the dim candlelight of the library, he felt that the gentle presence of this fan painter girl was the steadiest horizon, helping him stand firm against the storms of life. The trust between them was bound tighter than ever through this fated contact. She looked into his eyes, sensing a special connection that transcended all daily social barriers, silently promising to always be his loyal anchor. After the incident that night, Lysander ordered Pringle to replace all the wooden ladders in the castle with sturdier, iron-braced oak ladders. That silent care made Aurelia's heart overflow with sweet emotion. She began designing a new set of fans with extremely refined coastal horizon patterns, dedicated as a balance anchor for Lysander during upcoming social events. Every brushstroke on the gilded silk was executed with all the devotion and deep affection growing in her heart. That night, Aurelia dreamed a warm dream of her childhood in Surrey. In the dream, her father, Arthur, sat on the sun-drenched porch, patiently teaching her how to smooth the ivory fan ribs under the sweet sunlight. He smiled, stroking her hair and telling her that true art always requires patience and courage to overcome any challenge. When she woke early in the morning, Aurelia felt filled with energy and determination. She looked at the raw fan ribs on her desk, promising to devote all her heart to completing the restoration work, to honor her father's memory and the Duke's trust. She stepped to the drawing board, starting her work with a new confidence, her hands moving the brush more gracefully, each coastal horizon line appearing clear and steady under the bright candlelight. Chapter 5. The secret dance. After the turbulent night in the library, the atmosphere within Thornwood Manor warmed significantly. shedding some of the cold gloom of the wild coast. Lysander no longer maintained an absolute, distant coldness toward Aurelia. He tacitly permitted her to freely enter the greenhouse and the family's private library to study ancient fan patterns, while quietly ordering the housekeeper to provide the warmest woolen garments and food rations for Oliver. However, the prying eyes of Lord Osmond and the Mayfair nobles staying at the neighboring estate remained a constant threat to the siblings' position. One late afternoon, as the sea fog began to creep against the large window panes, the butler brought a small, gold-trimmed invitation to Aurelia's workshop. It was a private dinner invitation from the Duke in the secondary dining hall, a space free from complex stone floor patterns. His Grace wishes to hear your report on the progress of restoring the royal fan collection before preparing to present it to the ambassadorial delegation, the butler said politely. Aurelia stood before the small bronze mirror in her room. She only had a worn plum-colored silk evening gown, a garment from the days before the Danby estate was confiscated. She carefully smoothed the sleeves, brushed her long hazel hair, and pinned it back with a simple sandalwood fan pin. Her hands were clean, smelled faintly of turpentine and the soft scent of sandalwood. When she entered the secondary dining hall, Lysander was already seated at the head of the long, polished mahogany table. This dining room was paved with simple straight oak floorboards, illuminated by Mercer beeswax candles, casting a warm, gentle glow. Lawrence Lysander raised his eyes as Aurelia entered. The Duke's gray gaze rested on the fan painter's graceful figure, for a long moment before he stood up to pull out her chair, a small act of courtesy that carried immense weight from a peer of the realm. The dinner proceeded in a relaxed silence. Lysander occasionally glanced at the ivory fan depicting Thornwood Harbor that Aurelia had placed on the small side table next to her. Your fan, Lysander began, his voice deep. It is truly a marvelous work. How did you discover the rules of painting symmetrical horizontal lines to anchor the eyes? My father studied this from ancient Italian optical texts, Your Grace, Aurelia shared, her eyes shining with pride. He realized that when the vestibular system is disrupted, the brain loses direction if it looks at curved, moving lines. But if the eyes are anchored to a straight horizontal line parallel to the Earth's gravity, the brain reestablishes its sense of balance. The fan is the perfect tool to bring that horizon before the patient's eyes anywhere, at any time. Lysander nodded slightly, his long fingers tracing the gold-tipped ebony cane resting beside him. Your father was a brilliant scholar. It is a tragedy that the crown lost such a craftsman to low slander. And I shall prove my father's innocence, Your Grace. I know the designs of Thornwood Harbor are actually painted beneath the lacquer of the royal fan collection that Osmond swapped, Aurelia said firmly. Lysander looked at her with quiet admiration. He leaned back in his chair, his voice low, carrying the dark memories of the past. Your father was a resilient man, Aurelia. But Osmond is a cunning old fox in London. He has allied with political factions to monopolize the harbor trade. When the trial occurred 2 years ago, I was recovering from Waterloo at Portsmouth. Shrapnel was lodged deep in my skull, robbing me of my balance. Whenever I looked at complex patterns or stood in open spaces, I felt the ground collapse. Osmond used that time to sign the confiscation decree of the Danby workshop in my name, cutting off any connection between your father and me, preventing him from presenting the coated fan to the king. Aurelia was deeply shocked by Lysander's honest disclosure. She looked into his melancholic gray eyes, realizing that behind the cold majesty of a duke lay an immense physical and mental suffering that he had endured alone for 2 years. Your Grace, so you have had to suffer these dizzy spells all this time without speaking to anyone? She asked softly, her heart aching with deep sympathy. A Duke of Thornwood is not permitted weakness, Aurelia. Lysander smiled ironically, his thin lips tightening. If high society knew I was unsteady, they would strip me of my title and hand the harbor to Osmond immediately. I had to live in silence, using this cane to anchor myself and endure the rumors of Mayfair. Until I met you under the rain that night, your fan of parallel horizons brought true balance to my damaged brain. The warmth from the Mercer candles spread gently, warming the quiet room. Aurelia felt a silent bond tightening their wounded souls closer together. They were not merely partners in a transaction, but the only ones who understood and anchored each other's lives amidst the storm. Right then, the dining room door was abruptly pushed open. Lord Osmond walked in alongside Lady Honoria, the arrogant daughter of the rival family seeking a marriage alliance with Hartswood. Thornwood Honoria wore a splendid green velvet gown, her face full of disdain as she saw Aurelia seated opposite the Duke. Your Grace, Lysander Honoria spoke in an ironic tone, hiding her sneer behind her fan. I did not know Thornwood Manor was so short of servants, that your Grace must invite a common fan painter girl from the East End to dine at your table. This is a severe insult to the Mayfair guests visiting your estate. Osmond tapped his cane on the floor. Indeed, Lysander. You tarnish your title by harboring the daughter of the traitor Danby. Have you been blinded by these frivolous fan ribs? The air in the room froze instantly. Lysander set his silver fork down on the plate. The small sound made the entire room fall dead silent. He rose slowly, his commanding presence dominating the space. He looked at Osmond and Honoria with a gaze as cold as ice. Osmond, Lysander spoke in a cold, deep voice. Who permitted you to enter my private dining hall without my butler's announcement? Osmond paled slightly, stepping back before his nephew's authority. And Lady Honoria, Lysander turned to the pale young lady. Aurelia Danby is the chief restorer of Thornwood, holding the key to my health and honor. In this manner, her position is equal to any noble guest. If you find her presence an insult, my carriage is ready to take you back to London tonight. The Duke's decisive defense left Honoria trembling with anger, but she dared not utter a word before his supreme authority. Osmond clenched his cane, his eyes burning with hatred as he looked at Aurelia before leading Honoria out. Lysander let out a quiet sigh. He looked at Aurelia, whose eyes shone with deep gratitude. He nodded to her and continued his meal, silently establishing her absolute position at the estate. Chapter 6. Doubts under the sunset glow. Winter at Thornwood grew harsher, the sea winds howling against the cliffs and rattling the window frames of the old manor. Aurelia worked tirelessly in the workshop, her fingers occasionally stiff from the cold, but guided by her father's memory. Under her skilled hands, the ancient ivory fans were restored, brilliant under the candlelight and smelling of sandalwood. However, her brief peace was shattered one late afternoon, when Oliver brought a small gray envelope into the workshop, bearing no family crest. Sister Aurelia, an old gardener, gave me this letter near the rose garden. He said it is a very important document regarding our father, Oliver said, his eyes filled with worry. Aurelia took the letter, a vague anxiety rising in her heart. She carefully opened the gray envelope. Inside was a worn piece of parchment, yellowed at the corners. As she unfolded it, Aurelia immediately recognized it as a copy of the confiscation decree that had sealed her father's workshop 2 years ago. But what made her heart stop was the bottom corner of the document. Under the signature approving the confiscation and transferring control of the Danby workshop to Lord Osmond, there was a red wax seal of the Thornwood family crest, a shield bearing a black hawk, and a clear signature written in black ink, Lysander Hawkstone. Aurelia felt the world spin around her. Her mind went blank, her breath catching in her throat. Lysander's signature, the Duke who had brought them to his estate, who had promised to protect her and clear her father's name, was the very man who had signed the death warrant of her family's workshop. Tears spilled from her eyes, blurring the ink. She remembered his deep gaze under the candlelight, his gentle touch when he held her. Was it all just a perfect play to win her trust? She felt foolish to believe a duke could care for a poor fan painter. Every warm word, every gentle gesture became a sharp blade piercing her heart, shattering the fragile hope she had harbored of reclaiming their family honor and finding peace. Aurelia recalled the malicious rumors of Mayfair about the cruelty of the Hawkstone family. She felt disgusted by the false noble world, where she was merely a tool to help the Duke stand firm, only to be discarded without mercy. The pain of betrayal by the man she had just trusted brought tears streaming down her face, mixing with the freezing snow. She bit her lip, leading Oliver quickly through the slippery snow to escape Thornwood Manor. A small note fell from the envelope. It was Osmond's hurried handwriting. My dear Miss Danby, have you ever wondered why your noble Duke brought you to his manor and provided for you? He did not save you out of kindness. He only wished to use your father's perspective technique to pass the Royal Medical Board regarding his vertigo and to cover up his own theft of your estate. You are merely a tool to him. Suspicion, like a potent poison, quickly eroded the trust Aurelia had built for Lysander. The memories of the library, his warm hand holding hers, his silent promises, all became false and terrifying. He kept her at the manor only to exploit her talent as a pawn for his noble standing. The pain of past betrayal choked her soul. She did not want to believe it, but the signature and seal were real. They were sharp and undeniable. She looked at the boiling wax, her heart filled with bitterness. She thought of the nights he watched her draw, and the warmth of his arms when he caught her from the high ladder. Was it all a lie? The pain of betrayal suffocated her, making it impossible to breathe. Sister Aurelia, what is wrong? Why are you crying? Oliver asked in terror as he saw his sister trembling, her face pale as death. Oliver, Aurelia wiped her tears, her voice trembling but firm. Pack our things, we cannot stay here another second. We must leave, but there is a massive sea storm outside. Sister Oliver looked out the window, where snow was blinding and the howling wind. I do not care. Aurelia clenched the document in her hand, her heart consumed by pain and betrayal. I would rather freeze to death than remain here, as a tool for the man who destroyed our father. I will not be a pawn for any noble. Aurelia quickly packed their few belongings into an old woolen bag. She led Oliver silently out of the workshop through the southern side door. They stepped into the dark, freezing night of the herb garden. The sea storm hit them immediately, whipping freezing snow against their small figures. The snow was ankle-deep, making each step heavy. Aurelia pulled her brother along, ignoring the biting cold, wanting only to escape the dark manor of lies. The memory of Lysander's warmth dissolved into the freezing Yorkshire night. The freezing wind from the ocean blew hard, whipping snow through their worn cloaks. Aurelia trembled, her hands numb, but she clung to her bag of fan-painting tools, their only remaining heritage. Oliver walked beside her, holding her cold hand, his round eyes looking at her with love and worry. Sister Aurelia, do not fear. I will always walk with you. We shall face this storm together. The bravery and love of her brother was like a small fire warming her betrayed soul, giving her the strength to walk through the blinding storm. Chapter 7. The anchor midst the storm, the violent sea storm swept over the cliffs of Thornwood, knocking down old pine trees and completely cutting off the castle's firewood supply. At that very moment, a large arched window in the library was completely shattered by the gale. The fierce, freezing wind rushed into the corridors, blowing out all the primary candles illuminating the west wing. The private chambers of Lysander Hawkstone were immediately plunged into absolute darkness in a matter of seconds. Your Grace Lysander. Pringle banged on the Duke's chamber door from the outside, but there was no response, only the howling of the wind and the choked, terrified gasps of pain coming from within. Lysander's vertigo panic attack was erupting at its worst intensity yet, his chest tightening so much that he could not call out for help. The absolute darkness, combined with his Waterloo trauma, imprisoned his mind in infinite despair. The dizzying sensation suffocated him, causing a severe loss of directional orientation. Meanwhile, in the southern herb garden, Aurelia and Oliver were struggling against the sea storm. The snow fell knee-deep, and the bone-chilling cold quickly paralyzed young Oliver's feet. The boy collapsed onto the snow, his lips purple from the cold. Aurelia, I cannot walk anymore. It is so cold, Oliver whispered, his eyes closing from exhaustion. Aurelia was in a panic. She knelt, holding her brother tight, trying to massage his frozen hands. She realized she had been too impulsive in leading him away in such a violent storm. She looked back at the distant main castle, where the light from the special candles she had lit in the ground floor corridor was still burning resiliently amidst the blizzard, casting a guiding beam of light. That was the flame she had cast with all her love and father's craft, a flame that defied any storm. The terrifying dizziness ravaged Lysander's vestibular system in the pitch black. He felt as though he were trapped in a wildly spinning cage, the stone walls around him collapsing onto him, choking his lungs so he could not breathe. Memories of the roaring cannons and the bodies of comrades on the battlefield of Waterloo flooded his mind. Aurelia's warm presence, along with her bright candle and clean lavender fragrance, was like a cool stream of water poured over his burning soul, pulling him back to peaceful reality. Ignoring the heartache of her suspicion, her instinct to protect her brother and her sudden worry for Lysander being alone in the dark castle drove her forward. Aurelia lifted Oliver in her arms, using her remaining strength to trudge through the deep snow, running back to the castle guided by the light. Her legs were numb, her breath coming in cold, painful gasps, but she did not stop. That light was her single lighthouse leading her away from the edge of death. As she pushed open the side door and entered the warm stone hall, Pringle and Mrs. Gable immediately shrugged over to take the unconscious Oliver. They quickly wrapped the boy in hot woolen blankets next to the large kitchen stove. Aurelia was panting, her face pale as death, as she heard the sound of crashing objects coming from the west wing. His Grace Lysander is in danger. His panic has erupted in the darkness of the west wing. Pringle cried out in complete helplessness. Aurelia immediately snatched one of her large beeswax candles from the hall table, lit it, and ran up the stone stairs. She rushed into Lysander's chamber, where he was kneeling on the ground, his body trembling violently as he gasped for air in the pitch black. The room was freezing, the black velvet curtains blowing wild in the storm. Aurelia ran to kneel beside him, wrapping her arms around his shaking shoulders, placing the bright candle close to his pale face. "Lysander, Lysander, look at me." "I have returned," Aurelia cried out, her voice warm and clear. Seeing the soft golden light and Aurelia's tear-streaked face, Lysander woke from his Waterloo hallucination. He reached out, pulling her tight into his arms, burying his head in her shoulder as he panted. The warmth of their bodies and the clean scent of the lavender fan calmed the sensory storm in his mind. He held her tight, fearing that if he let go, the darkness would trap him forever. His heartbeat slowly stabilized under the gentle caress of her hands. Once Lysander had fully calmed, he noticed the worn document that had fallen from her cloak pocket. He picked it up and immediately understood everything. He stood up, walked to his large writing desk, opened his private document chest, and retrieved a genuine document with his real signature in Thornwood's natural ink, placing it next to the forged paper. "Look, my real signature always features a double underline and the gold wax seal of the estate. This document is a forgery by Osmond to divide us and force you to leave the manor. He knows I need your fans' focus to stand, and he wants to trigger my panic to seize the estate," Lysander said softly, his gray eyes full of sincerity and pain. Aurelia compared the two signatures under the candlelight. Osmond's forgery was rigid, lacking the natural flow of Lysander's real hand. All misunderstanding dissolved completely. She nodded gently, placing her warm hand over his. "I believe you, Lysander. I am sorry for doubting you." Lysander clasped her hand, his gaze fixed on the candle flame burning steady through the night. He knew this flame lit not only Thornwood Manor, but also their future path through any storm. Their bond after the storm grew stronger than ever, defying any plot. They held each other close, sharing warmth in the cold stone room, filled with happiness as the misunderstanding was resolved. Once the fire in the coal stove was restored, the main hall of Thornwood Manor slowly warmed up, dispelling the bone-chilling cold of the terrifying sea storm. The servants breathed a sigh of relief, expressing their deep gratitude for Aurelia's bravery in defying the blizzard and darkness to save their master from a dangerous vertigo attack. Mrs. Gable brought a hot bowl of chicken soup to their room, her eyes softened with genuine respect for the proud Danby girl. Aurelia sat by the fire, watching Oliver eat happily, her heart filled with true peace. Chapter 8: The Marble Floor Trap. The night before the Grand Royal Winter Solstice Ball at Thornwood Manor, the entire estate was busy with preparation. The grand hall of the castle, which was usually covered in thick, solid-colored wool carpets, was being rapidly renovated. Under the shady direction of Lord Osmond, a large crew of elderly masons had been brought from London to repave the entire central ballroom floor. Aurelia was checking her ivory fan ribs in the library when Oliver ran in, his face flushed and his breath coming in hurried gasps. Osmond's design for the new marble floor utilized a highly dangerous moire visual illusion. Concentric circles of contrasting black and polished white marble were arranged with decreasing width from the center outward, creating a continuous, dizzying spiral illusion when the candlelight reflected from above. This was a perfect mathematical geometric trap designed by cunning architects to destroy Lysander's balance. Aurelia studied the sketch carefully, identifying the points where the spiral pattern's focus dissolved, in order to draw counterbalancing brushstrokes on the silk fan, turning it into a visual shield. "Sister Aurelia, something strange is happening in the grand ballroom." I sneaked in to look at the mason's drawings. "The design is not straight lines," Oliver said, handing her a piece of parchment with a quick sketch he had copied. Aurelia took the paper. As she looked at the sketch, her heart clenched. On the parchment was the design of a massive marble floor with concentric circles and concentric spirals, crossing in contrasting black and polished white marble. This was a sophisticated geometric trap for someone with a severe vestibular injury like Lysander. Stepping and especially spinning on a surface with contrasting black and white concentric spirals would trigger severe vertigo immediately. His brain would be deceived by the optical illusion, causing his balance system to collapse completely, making him stumble and collapse before the royal guests. Osmond wants to use this to publicly destroy Lysander's standing, forcing him to cede control of the harbor. Aurelia tightened her grip on the paper, her eyes burning with determination. She knew she could not stop the repaving with the gala so close, but she could craft an optical weapon to counter it. She rushed back to her workshop, locked the door, and began a race against time. Aurelia took her best ivory fan, the cream silk leaf smooth and perfect. She used her finest squirrel hairbrush, mixing cobalt blue powder with Surrey turpentine. Throughout the howling winter night, the freezing cold seeped through the window seams, turning her fingers stiff. Her eyes grew blurry with sleep after hours of concentration on the tiny space of the ivory ribs. She had to bite her tongue, tasting copper to keep her mind sharp. She thought of Lysander, the proud man facing public humiliation tonight. She thought of his broad shoulders shaking in the library, and his cold hands holding hers as his sole anchor. "Sister Aurelia, drink some warm mint tea to stay awake." Oliver woke in the middle of the night, bringing a steaming cup of tea. Aurelia took the cup, drank a few gulps, and returned to her chisel. She carefully polished each ivory rib with clean Surrey beeswax to ensure the fan opened silently, avoiding any noise that would distract the Duke's hearing. The gilded silk was stretched flat on the bamboo frame, coated with protective lacquer against the sea mist. She aligned the optical perspective precisely on each brushstroke of the coastal scenery, creating a perfectly parallel Thornwood horizon line. This horizon line was the perfect visual anchor for Lysander to lock his focus onto, allowing his brain to reject the spinning illusion of the spiral floor. Every detail, from the masts of the ships to the harbor stones, was painted with all her concentration and love. By the time the castle bell struck 6 in the morning, signaling the new day, Aurelia had completed the specialized fan. The fan opened smoothly, wafting the sweet scent of sandalwood, its gilded silk reflecting the steady cobalt blue horizon line like a silent vow of protection. She looked at her work under the morning light, breathing a sigh of relief, though her heart beat with anticipation for the crucial night. Aurelia carefully placed the specialized fan into a plum silk sleeve embroidered with gold thread, keeping it pristine before the ball. She knew this fan was not just art, but a shield to protect Lysander's life and honor from Osmond's trap. She checked the opening mechanism, ensuring it moved silently. Every detail was prepared with care, ready for the battle between light and dark at Thornwood. She took a deep breath, adjusted her plum silk gown, and prayed Lysander would stand firm. Oliver held her hand to give her strength, his eyes full of pride. Aurelia smiled, stroking his hair, knowing the night would be difficult, but her heart was steady as she protected the man she loved. Chapter 9. The Balancing Dance. The grand hall of Thornwood Manor was bright and magnificent under the light of thousands of Mercer beeswax candles hanging from crystal chandeliers. The high society of Mayfair, dressed in their most splendid ball gowns and tailcoats, strolled and chatted. In the center of the hall, the newly repaved central ballroom floor, of contrasting concentric black and white marble, reflected the candlelight like a mirror, creating a hypnotic, spinning illusion beneath the feet of anyone looking down. The nobility murmured in curiosity about this unique but challenging floor design, with many feeling dizzy after staring too long at the polished, alternating patterns. Lysander Hawkstone stood at the top of the stone staircase, wearing his majestic black velvet cloak lined with phoenix feathers, his right hand gripping his ebony cane. When he looked down at the ballroom floor, his chest tightened. The contrasting black and white concentric spiral patterns beneath the bright candles immediately triggered severe vertigo in his brain. The floor seemed to spin violently, chowing like a ship in a storm. He began to lose balance, taking an unsteady step down, both hands gripping the oak balustrade, his face pale and cold sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Lord Osmond stood in a corner of the ballroom, with the Royal Medical Board and Mayfair ladies, his gaze full of triumph as he watched Lysander begin to lose control of his body. "Look, our Duke is beginning to stumble like a drunkard," Osmond said aloud, his mocking voice ringing out as the crowd fell silent. Lysander tried to descend with his cane, but the moment his boot touched the first spiral pattern, his world turned upside down. His head spun and he wavered, almost collapsing onto the marble floor in front of the Royal Commission. Just then the crowd parted. Aurelia Danby entered the hall. She wore her worn plum silk gown, but her posture was as proud and dignified as a queen's. In her hand was the specialized ivory fan she had just finished. She walked swiftly to the ballroom, standing right in front of Lysander, shielding his eyes from the concentric patterns beneath. She opened the fan with the Thornwood horizon line, holding it before his eyes at a steady distance. "Lysander, look at my fan. Focus on the Thornwood horizon," Aurelia said, her voice clear and soothing. Lysander raised his trembling eyes to look at the fan held before him. His sharp gray gaze immediately locked onto the parallel cobalt blue horizon line, painted masterfully upon the gilded silk. The terrifying illusion of the spinning floor in his brain ceased almost instantly. Anchored by this perfect, symmetrical horizontal line, his mind re-established its sense of balance and direction. His rapid breathing quieted, the tension in his chest dissipated, and a healthy color returned to his pale face. He stood tall, and the commanding, majestic presence of the Duke of Thornwood returned to him completely. Lysander smiled softly, setting his gold-tipped ebony cane against the wooden balustrade, as he no longer needed its physical support. Without a single trace of hesitation, he stepped forward and gently clasped Aurelia's small hand, leading her toward the center of the concentric, spiral-patterned marble floor, leaving Lord Osmond standing in absolute, stunned shock. The melodious strain of a waltz began to echo through the grand hall. Lysander placed his hand gently around Aurelia's waist, guiding her into a perfect, sweeping waltz across the ballroom. Throughout their movement, his gray eyes remained fixed onto the gilded silk fan she held gracefully over her shoulder, using it as his steadfast balance anchor. They spun and glided over the spiral floor like elegant swans upon a quiet lake, standing firm and majestic against Osmond's devious geometric trap. Their waltz was in perfect, breathless harmony, her plum silk gown swirling beautifully under the glow of the crystal chandeliers. The entire assembly of guests watched in hushed silence, all mockery and gossip replaced by deep admiration for Aurelia's dignity and extraordinary artistic talent. As the dance concluded to a thunderous burst of applause from the gathered nobility, Lord Osmond Hawkstone stepped forward in a fit of silent rage. He snatched a gold-framed maritime map of Thornwood Harbor from his personal attendant and presented it before the local magistrate and the estate trustees. The dance may prove his physical capacity, but this official legal document confirms he signed over control of Thornwood Harbor to me a month ago. This harbor map bears Lysander's signature and family seal. Lysander frowned in suspicion, but Aurelia stepped forward with absolute calm. She asked permission from the magistrate and Sir Abernathy, the royal map examiner, to inspect the map. Aurelia held her father's portable optical magnifier and pointed at the intricate drawings of the harbor layout. Sir Abernathy, this map is a complete forgery manufactured by Osmond to seize control of the harbor. I shall prove my claim using two undeniable artistic and perspective flaws that the forger overlooked. First, the official harbor maps of Thornwood, dating from 1780, strictly utilize single-point horizon perspective, established by naval engineers to calculate deep-water channels. In contrast, this forged document utilizes modern multi-point angular perspective, a drawing technique never employed on the old maritime charts of this estate. This incorrect perspective line clearly reveals the forger is a modern artist trained in London, not an estate cartographer who worked here. Second, look closely at the lines and the signature. The genuine map was drawn with traditional reed and goosequill pens, which leave varying stroke widths and natural ink pools under magnification. This forgery, however, was drawn with a modern steel pen, leaving uniform, sharp, and flat lines. The forger was in a hurry and used modern steel tools upon aged parchment, betraying his deceit to any expert eye. Sir Abernathy examined it with his glass, nodding in shock. Absolutely correct. A 15-degree off-center perspective and modern steel pen lines. This map is a forgery. Magistrate Squire Thornton stood up, gesturing commandingly to the bailiffs. Lord Osmond Hawkstone, your forgery to seize royal property is exposed by the expert testimony of Miss Danby. Arrest him immediately. The cold clanking of iron chains followed as Osmond was led away in utter despair. Lysander held Aurelia's hand tightly, his gray eyes smiling with proud warmth under the candlelight. The fan painter stood tall beside him, both of them tasting the sweetness of justice. All past disdain from Mayfair society vanished, replaced by deep respect for her talent and pride. Chapter 10. Dawn over Thornwood Harbor. With the perspective and penstroke evidence presented by Aurelia Danby before the Royal Commission, Lord Osmond's plot was fully exposed. The judgment from the Crown was swift, severe, and absolute. Lord Osmond was stripped of his title. His private estate was confiscated to compensate the Danby family for the damages, and he was exiled permanently to the South African colony. Lady Honoria and her family were ostracized from Mayfair society. The villain's end was just, clearing Arthur Danby's name after years of stain. The long-tarnished honor of the late Arthur Danby was now fully and gloriously restored before the British Crown and the entire high society of London. The king himself signed a royal decree officially exonerating the late master fan painter of all false charges of treason, restoring the family name to its former glory, and returning their ancestral estate in Surrey to the rightful heirs. Those members of Mayfair high society, who had once shunned and insulted the siblings, now bowed respectfully and tipped their hats whenever Aurelia and Oliver passed in their carriage. However, before she would stand at the altar to marry Lysander and take her place as the Duchess of Thornwood, Aurelia desired the highest official recognition of her independent artistic talent. She wished to prove conclusively to the critical high society of Mayfair that she entered the grand halls of the Hawkstone family with her own dignity, and by virtue of her own extraordinary craftsmanship, rather than merely relying on the Duke's favor or pity. The upcoming nuptials at Thornwood Harbor filled the coastal air with festive warmth, under the bright and welcoming rays of the spring sunshine. The London nobles, who had once cruelly shunned the siblings during their dark days of poverty, now desperately sent lavish wedding gifts and flattering letters of congratulation to secure their favor. But Aurelia ignored their transparent falsity, focusing her attention instead on her brother Oliver. Dressed in a handsome new blue velvet coat, his right hand fully healed from the ivory splinters, the boy smiled proudly as he prepared to scatter fresh rose petals along the path for his sister. To Aurelia, her brother's happiness and her father's restored honor were the greatest wedding gifts she could ever receive. On a beautiful sunny spring morning, as the warm sea breeze stirred the sails of the ships in Thornwood Harbor, Lysander entered her bright workshop. Walking behind him with a respectful posture was the butler Pringle, carrying a polished silver tray upon which rested the official, gold-trimmed royal decree from the king. Lysander took the heavy parchment of the decree in his hands, presenting it to Aurelia with a gaze filled with warmth and respect. Aurelia Danby, by royal decree of His Majesty and the formal recognition of the London Art Academy, you are officially appointed as the royal fan painter of Thornwood. This high office recognizes your outstanding perspective drawing and delicate carving talent as an independent artist, completely distinct from any noble title you shall gain by our marriage. Aurelia received the heavy document, warm tears of pride and relief rolling down her cheeks as her late father's dream was finally fulfilled in the most glorious manner. The royal decree confirmed her status as a master craftsman, completely erasing the old, painful stain of treason from the Danby name. Oliver ran forward to hug his sister tightly, his joyous laughter echoing through the room and dispelling the last remnants of the old, cold chill of Thornwood Manor. This prestigious royal appointment proved her independent artistic standing to the world, before she took her vows to become Lysander's wife. Spring arrived at Thornwood in full beauty, bringing warm sea breezes that melted the last of the winter ice from the rugged cliffs. Colorful wildflowers began to bloom in abundance along the stone pathways, filling the coastal air with a sweet, fresh fragrance. Thornwood Harbor bustled once more with the activity of merchant ships and trading vessels from all parts of the world, operating smoothly under the Duke's firm and just directions. The grand wedding of Lysander Hawkstone and Aurelia Danby was celebrated at the ancient coastal chapel of Thornwood Harbor on a beautiful, sunny April day. To accommodate the Duke's needs and ensure his absolute comfort, the chapel floor was completely covered with thick, flat red velvet carpets that eliminated any complex patterns, illuminated by the soft and steady glow of sweet-scented Mercer beeswax candles. Aurelia walked down the carpeted aisle in her white mulberry silk wedding gown, holding the beautiful gilded ivory fan that had served as their visual anchor and saved their lives. She stepped toward the altar with a proud, graceful posture as the celebrated royal fan painter of Thornwood, ready to bind her life to the man who had protected her. The entire assembly of the London nobility bowed their heads and curtsied respectfully as she passed down the carpeted aisle, murmuring and calling her by her new title, Your Grace, the Duchess of Thornwood. On their wedding night in the West Wing, Lysander held his wife close, kissing her forehead under the spring moon. They looked out at the sea, where the lighthouse illuminated the peaceful Thornwood horizon. Aurelia, Lysander whispered softly as the cool night wind ruffled his hair. You are the steadiest and most beautiful horizon of my life. From this day forward, Thornwood storms will never make me dizzy again, for I hold the hand of my soul anchor, the only one who brings peace to my soul. After their beautiful wedding ceremony, Lysander took Aurelia on a peaceful carriage ride in a luxurious open carriage along the coast under the warm spring sun. The azure waves crashed gently against the ancient cliffs, sending white foam in the air, and white seagulls glided gracefully in the clear blue sky. Standing together by the stone railing of the cliffside pathway, Lysander held his wife's hand tightly in his own, planning to build a free art and craftsmanship school in Surrey to support poor orphaned children, so they might learn a proper trade. Aurelia smiled with pure happiness, knowing that their lives would be filled with the light of love and understanding, facing the future together. Aurelia smiled, holding him close against her chest, feeling the steady and peaceful beat of their hearts under the soft light of the spring moon, a sacred flame of love and honor that would never die. Thornwood Harbor opened before them to a bright, peaceful, and highly prosperous future. Lysander held her closer, wrapping his arms around her waist, vowing to forever protect, support, and cherish his talented wife. The gentle spring breeze carried Oliver's happy laughter from the stone courtyard below, signaling a wonderful beginning for two lonely souls who had finally found their anchor and peace in each other. The future of Thornwood was lit by love, understanding, and honor. They watched the large merchant ship come home to the harbor under the sweet spring moon.